Beauty and the Beast: The Tragedy of Lucien and Gaston. Chapter 1. A Knock at the Gate. Lucien was a French feudal lord that had inherited his father's castle some years ago. It was an isolated place, hard to get to, and mining and logging were his primary source of income. It was a gloomy area by nature with gloomy people, but his mother's garden, which he kept maintaining, made him forget the natural, dreadful scenery. He could spend hours in it, taking in the aromas and lose himself in his own slice of heaven. He particularly enjoyed inviting the daughters of the local peasants, and watching their reaction to seeing it for the first time. Their eyes would light up, and a big smile come to their face. They had never seen anything like this, and considering many were illiterate, most likely never had imagined it or had it described to them. He enjoyed reading, dining and painting in the garden, and allowed some children to play in it, for he often said the sound of their laughter along with the sound of the birds made it feel closer to heaven. The boys were kept out, due to their rough nature. Their curiosity and disposition for destruction would impulse them to start plucking the petals of the flowers as to observe what was underneath them. Or boy being boys, they would break into a fight, or a game of tag and destroy the garden with it. This had happened a few times, and he had disciplined them oftentimes, but the events kept happening, and so he permanently banned the boys. But the girls weren't without their incidents. The problem with the girls was that they loved the flowers so much, some attempted to steal one to take home. By threat of being permanently banished and rewarding anyone snitching on the theft, he was able to severely mitigate this, however. His father had been a strong man, who had lived through hard times. Despite being noble, he had been frugal originally. He had known many lords, who had lost their ancestral birthright, either through war or mismanagement. He often told Lucien that there was a price for weakness, and the fate of those fallen should not be theirs. His mother had come from the lowlands, close to the ocean, and was not a native to these northern mountains. She instilled in him a love for music, literature and fine dining, which his father completely lacked. Many of the decorations in the castle had come at her orders, but much of the original roughness had remained in the areas of the castle visitors weren't allowed to enter. These included many animals a taxidermist had prepared after his hunting trips. Some of these were the dungeons and prison cells, which had hosted generations of criminals, enemy combatants, traitors and heathens. Some higher towers, where his ancestors, including his father, had prepared for war, had nothing of a woman's touch, and were the pinnacle of manly virtue. Lucien had been the first generation from his estate to engage in the school system devised by the French king, in where nobles came together and be taught by the best minds France could offer them. Before this, every lord would find their own tutors, which produced mixed results, for not everyone knew the same histories, read the same books, had grasp of the same mathematical or geographical concepts. Imagine preparing for war, and having your war council argue as to where a certain estate is located, and can't even decide as to which direction to march. War is the father of us all. And because of war, the French king decided to give the nobles a common education. Just because we speak the same language, doesn't mean the curse of the Tower of Babel doesn't affect us, said the king. With the common understanding of history, literature, mathematics and science, along with the best practices of war and the technologies to wage it, the French would be better disposed to the bloody business of Mars. The wars had changed Lucien somewhat. He didn't talk about it much, but those that knew him noticed that the once happy, high-spirited boy had become gloomy, and the harshness of his father, while not completely taking over, had penetrated him. But with the harshness he had experienced, also grew the love for his mother's tastes and her garden. As a boy he had taken it for granted and dreamed of adventure elsewhere, while being elsewhere he dreamt of the comfort of home, and the peacefulness of that garden. From this new change of mind, also grew a new disposition towards charity. He refused to give money to the church, for he was certain, little or any would go to the needy, but would quietly hand over a favor or money, to those within his state. He was able to know about a misfortune, and he deemed them worthy of his assistance. Besides, doing so would have been something his mother would have liked, who he very much missed. And because of this way of his, the misfortunes of this story took place. "Lord Lucien," said the servant as she walked in, "there's an old woman, knocking at the gate asking for shelter. She says to have been an acquaintance of your father's and grandfather's." He was intrigued. He ordered to let her in, to dry her, give her a new pair of clothes, feed her and prepare a warm bed for her, and let her know he would very much like to talk to her either tonight or sometime tomorrow and have her tell stories about his family. The servant nodded, and did as commanded.